up in Oklahoma City. So I grew up in like the buckle of the Bible Belt, and I grew up in a really conservative Christian home, and I say that as a good thing. I knew for early on, that I just felt different from the boys, or like they would all just do sports stuff. I wasn't really into that. I was in dance class, I was in figure skating, so my interests were just kind of different.
Again, sometimes the unspoken words are the most powerful. Of nobody can know about your past, nobody can know about your present struggles. You can't really open up to others in a way that's vulnerable.
Junior high, I just remember realizing that all of my budding sexuality, like I was attracted to the boys that were in youth group or at school.
I, as an individual, I, as a son of God, for women, those women, those daughters of God, we are responsible for our own spiritual well-being.
On the outside, I'm like the most likely to succeed. I'm the Bible quiz champion, youth group leader person. And on the inside, I have this, increasingly like highly developed sexual fantasy life. Just tears will be running down my face as I think like, oh, I feel so locked up inside, but I can't talk about what's so heavy on me.
And we start really supporting one another. We wind up having this incredible group of support and care where we can live out James 5:16 of confessing our sins.
And I remember one time just kind of waking up from sleep and thinking about all this, and just the language dropped in me. It's like, oh, I guess this is what it is to be gay. So I came out of the closet, came out to my family, and I remember sitting down with them and just saying, hey guys, this is the hand that I've been dealt.
There's something so revolutionary about being in an imperfect but a godly environment.
The source is Jesus, and He will always make a way.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of the Love and Truth Network podcast. I'm joined today by a longtime friend of mine and Melissa's, Andrew Franklin, and we've known each other. Really, we got connected through Living Waters and through Desert Stream Ministries, and our beloved friend, Andrew Comiskey, and his great work.
Yes.
And so grateful for them always. And but anyway, I'm excited to have Andrew here with us today. It's been a while since Andrew and I have connected, but I'm excited for you to hear his story and the story really of God's work and grace in his life. So Andrew, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, so good to be with you. Yeah, it was crazy when we were just catching up, talking about your kids being teenagers now, and I remember them when they were tiny, and you remember my son when he was tiny,
That's
and
right.
now he's 10. It's wild.
I know. Time just flies by, and especially when you're involved in ministry and I don't know, just things of the kingdom. It does seem like
Yes.
the days are actually, friends of ours said years ago when our sons were first born, they said the days are long and the years are short. At first I thought, well, that's kind of a weird, no, it's actually perfect.
That's so
It's so
true.
true.
But the beautiful thing when you're doing kingdom work too, it's like all the time can go by, and then you see each other. It's like not a day has gone by
Yes.
because you're still just doing the stuff. It's a really beautiful thing.
Yeah, that's so true. Well, hey, we're so glad that you're here, and our audience, both those that view our podcast as well as those that are listening in, are accustomed to just hearing our guest stories and how they came to faith in Jesus, what life looked like beforehand, and what life has looked like afterwards. So, would love for you to share with us.
Yeah, it'd be great. Well, I live in Seattle now, but I grew up in Oklahoma City. So I grew up in like the buckle of the Bible Belt, and I grew up in a really conservative Christian home, and I say that as a good thing. It was good for me overall. I'm so glad that I was raised to know the Bible. We were in church every time the doors were open, and that was like our community. We really had deep community in those years. But so for me in that environment, I knew for early on, that I just felt different from the boys, or like they would all just do sports stuff. I wasn't really into that. I was in dance class, I was in figure skating, so my interests were just kind of different, and so I had some good boys who were friends in church. But I was more comfortable around girls, and that just kind of continued. Uh, until I hit puberty, junior high. I just remember realizing that all of my budding sexuality, like I was attracted to the boys that were in youth group or at school or whatever. And, everyone was talking about me, like asking girls out or something, but that wasn't really an interest. I just would do it because I felt like that's what other people were doing. And I remember one time just kind of waking up uh, from sleep and thinking about all this, and just the language dropped in me. It's like, oh, I guess this is what it is to be gay. I mean, that means that I'm gay.
Mm.
But I'm in this church environment. I think, hey, I know, and what I've experienced is if people deal with this stuff, they get gossiped about, they get made fun of. Everyone's speculating about what their stuff is, and I don't want any part of that. So I just really developed in my junior high school years this like division where on the outside I'm like the most likely to succeed. I'm the Bible quiz champion, youth group leader person, and on the inside I have this, increasingly like highly developed sexual fantasy life, based around my guy friends, and so that all just kind of continued. And I remember times where I'm, even in youth group times, people are talking about their struggles, confessing their sins, and just tears would be running down my face as I think like, oh, I feel so locked up inside, but I can't talk about what's so heavy on me, So I would maybe say stuff like I hate my dad, which was true. I could confess some things, but then there was these other parts as like I can't let this be known. Meanwhile, I'm asking God to take it away. I don't want to be dealing with any of this, and God seemingly to me is just not answering my
Hmm.
prayers. Uh, so this all continues. I felt called by God to be in full time ministry, and which I am now. But at the time, like I feel this thing, but I have all these secrets, and then I get an opportunity to go to University of Oklahoma and study musical theater, and I thought, well, maybe that's my mission field, and I'm going to bring Jesus into the arts community. But I get in there, and because I have no idea who I am, and I'm in this environment where my whole thing is pretending to be other people. That's the whole career. It was a bad setup for me, and so I increasingly just got into party scene. Within 6 months or so, I came out of the closet, came out to my family, and I remember sitting down with them and just saying, "Hey guys, this is the hand that I've been dealt. Like I can either keep suppressing who I am, or I can just own my desire to be happy and go seek happiness how I see that I can." And they at that juncture said, in their very simple Christian Oklahoma way, like, honey, we think you're struggling with sin. Like everyone struggles with
Hmm.
sin, and we can't just live in sin. We submit it to Jesus. And I thought, not interested in that, people. So I just dove into that party scene, and um, eventually I moved to New York, and I was pursuing musical theater there. But I started to see, especially when I moved there and everything I wanted was at my fingertips, just how much I was not faithful to my boyfriends. I was disrespectful to even friends, and I was a backstabber. Just I started being uncomfortable with the person I was becoming, and that all kind of culminated in a night where I partied, woke up the next morning, didn't remember what happened. This was all kind of normal at the time, and we would just kind of commiserate, my friends afterwards, like, oh, the crazy things that happened last night. But what I found out is that that night before, I'd done several really disrespectful things to my friends, and then I had come back home, and there was a party at my apartment, and I had tried to coerce a guy at this party to have sex with me, and I found that out. I didn't remember it. I found it out, and so that was how God finally like confronted me with who I was when my guard was down. I didn't remember this, so this was like when my subconscious is
Hmm.
coming out,
Right.
kind of. I'm a person that is not trustworthy, that's hurtful, and can be so damaging. And I didn't know what to do with that. And none of my friends in my party scene and theater scene knew what to tell me. And so it made me think maybe all the things that the Christians had been saying was true, just in that maybe this is destructive. But I didn't really know. So I dug this Bible out from under my bed. My mom had shipped me my Bible and some Christian books, and I'd shoved them under my bed in my little apartment in Hell's Kitchen. And And I opened the Bible, and I'd been in the Bible so much growing up, but always just for information. It was to do the Bible quiz thing, or whatever. But I'd never read the Bible out of like a deep desperation for God to save me out of, I didn't even know what, but
Mhm.
just to save me out of what I knew was destructive for me. And so I would read the Gospel of John, and it wasn't even about the information coming in. It was just like I would just cry. Like I just would weep, knowing like I needed God to meet me. And I remember reading about the woman at the well, and this woman who'd been in bad relationship after bad relationship after bad relationship, and has one conversation with Jesus, and something changed in her.
Mm.
Remember reading about the man who was born blind in John 9, and he had this condition that he didn't ask for. He didn't know why he had it. And he had one conversation with Jesus, and something shifted. And so I was ruminating on all this. And I remember going home one day from work on the subway, and I just came under what I now would say is conviction. But I knew my heart was racing, and I had to decide if Jesus was going to be everything for me, or if he wasn't. Then I just had to stop exploring it, because it was too much for me. And so I went back to my little apartment room and hit the ground, and I just said, "Okay, God, I'm yours if you'll take me." And just those simple words. That's all that I had to
Mm.
say. And the presence of God just washed over me for the first time in my life. And I heard God speak to me, which I didn't even really have language for that, but I knew in my spirit, the Holy Spirit just saying to me, uh, as God looking at me and all of my stuff and my sin, and God said, "Andrew, I'm not mad at you." And that was so far beyond even just the party weekend that I'd had. It was about, from the time I was 4 or 5 years old and felt different, felt like there's something wrong with me. And God just like securing me in love,
Mm. Right.
in this really deep way. And I remember after that, like talking to some friends, who were saying like, yeah, like, how are you going to navigate the being gay and being a Christian? I was like, I don't know. All that I know is that like I gave my life to Jesus, and so I've got to figure this out. So then long you could lots of details later, long story later. I get pretty quickly within a couple months. I have an old family friend that put me in touch with Stephen Black, who's a guy who just has walked with people struggling with sexual sin for years and
Yeah.
years. And I'm sitting in his office back home where I grew up in Oklahoma City. And I remember him asking me, "Hey, can you tell me what your struggle is? This is my whole calling, is to help people in whatever their struggle might be. What's going on? Where do you need help?" And I started trying to talk. And he cut me off after a minute or two. He said, "Andrew," he's like, "you're shaking really visibly, and you have red blotches all over your neck and your face. Are you scared? Are you scared to talk to me?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm terrified to tell another Christian all this stuff that I just thought you don't say to Christians." And then he just broke in and he said, "Why don't I tell you why I'm here?" And he shared his story with me of his own struggle with his sexuality and addiction, and recovering from abuse and hurt, and how Jesus had met him in these
Mm.
places. And I'd never heard a Christian just speak so candidly about their actual need for a savior, and the way Jesus had met them in their mess.
Mm.
And then he said to me, he said, "Andrew, there's reasons why you've done the things that you've done. There's reasons why you currently want the things that you want. And God's your father. God loves you. And he wants to give you answers to these deep questions. And he's going to do it through relationship." And so that just began a process where I I call it my year of deconstruction, where I wasn't deconstructing Christianity, I was deconstructing Andrew Franklin,
Yeah.
and saying, "Here's all that I believe about myself, but I'm putting it all on the table, and allowing a trusted Christian. I'm allowing God's word. I'm allowing community to show me what's true about who God is, about who I am, and about how to walk forward in light of that." Uh, so that began a journey that really I truly feel I'm still on today. I'm certainly not where I was back in, what was that, 2006, but I'm still learning about love and on God's terms and in God's way. I'm still learning to stay rooted and grounded in the love of God in the midst of all the challenges of life, right?
Yes.
And so. I look back on those days like such a beautiful time and such a hard time, learning what, healthy friendships with men look like. Some years later, starting to learn how to love and honor women around me, and particularly my wife Jordan, that I eventually met at church. All these things part of the journey. Now we have 4 kids, and none of those things are a place where it's like, oh, and at some point in there I just arrived and I had no more problems anymore. I've had problems all along the way, and life brings up new problems, right?
Yes.
And yet I think the thing that I have just seen in Jesus over these years now is how I increasingly see how much I need and have to rely on him, but I also increasingly see just like how faithful he is when the problems seem bigger and bigger. Sometimes he shows himself to be stronger and stronger, and um, so I just like, yeah, that'd be kind of where my life, my being a husband, being a dad, being in pastoral ministry, just all comes out of the overflow of just the work that God continues to do in
Mm,
me day by day.
yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that with us, Andrew. That's really powerful, and I just appreciate also, your candor. And I just saw Stephen Black at an event a couple weeks ago, so it's fun to bump into him again. And
Yeah,
but I and you're right that when someone is willing to go first, when someone is willing to say, "Hey, this is where I've been. This is what I've done." I'm reminded of our friend Crystal Renaud Day, who is the founder of She Recovery, and I'm reminded of her story of getting hooked on her brother's pornography when first introduced to it when she was 10 years old and found it, came across it, and over the course of some time, very quickly became addicted to pornography. And it wasn't until she was 19 years of age, and someone who went to church all the time, even used the part of her testimony is when she was volunteering at the church office, she would often any little bit of time that she could get to get on the internet, she's looking at pornography. It was going deeper and deeper into darker things. And it took a young woman a few years older than her, when Crystal was about 19 years old, I believe, that opened up and shared her story with her. But also, this woman, w- I'm often I'm often talking about the fact that Christians need to stop cleaning up our stories. We oftentimes don't tell our
yes,
stories at all, but then when we do, we sanitize them so much that they still it sounds almost to people listening who are really trapped in some very dark things that they can't really relate to our story. Now, not everybody has gone through the kind of stuff we've gone through. Some people have come to
sure,
faith, and thankfully, it's a powerful story in today's day and age to not have gone through the gutter the way that I have, and some of what you described as well. That is a powerful story. But for those of us who have, we've got to stop cleaning up our stories enough that people can really relate to it. And so in Crystal's case, this woman who is a little bit older shared her story and also talked to her about how she had gotten caught up in pornography as well. And it was this invitation for Crystal to say, yeah, me too. And it was the first time that she admitted that, and it was the beginning of life change and transformation for her
yeah,
because she was
yeah,
willing. And I think about what Stephen did for you in just helping you kind of settle down and hear from someone first and then be able to share. And it just highlights to me the importance of how we as believers need to be willing for God to take our story, and because it ultimately our story is his story, but to take that
yes,
story and to use it in the lives of others in a way that's vulnerable and transparent. So do you
yes.
have thoughts about that concept or that idea of greater vulnerability in our lives?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, I think often too, and I know many, many pastors and people who again have different stories or don't have super loaded
Yep.
stories, but I think everyone thinks. I think we all kind of tend to think, well, I know that I still have weakness. I know that there's challenges. Anytime I've ever talked to another pastor about the challenges I'm facing, they just laugh and they're like, oh yeah, I get it. But I think it's so easy to assume that because it's very real to us that people around us just get that. Because now I preach every Sunday, and many Sundays, I would say the majority of
Right.
Sundays, the specific aspects of my story about where I came from or even gender identity stuff, like that's not necessarily tied into that week. And so, but when it connects, or when I feel like I should share it in some way, I just do,
Mhm.
and it's all just kind of a normal Sunday to me.
Yes.
But every time I do, there's this wave of people. It's like, I need to talk about it. It's like like there's this fruit that
Yeah.
happens, and again, it's not even for me like, oh, the other weeks I'm just masking. I don't think about it at all. And then I'm always shocked when people are like, I had no idea that this was your life or your story. I've never heard anyone in ministry say anything like this before. And now I need to unburden my soul. Now I need to share where I need Jesus that I've never told anyone about.
Yes.
So it just strikes me how much, again, I don't think anyone with ill intention, I don't even think, I don't think it'd be appropriate for me every week to make it
Well,
about
sure.
my
That's
specific
that's right.
thing, but just the regularity of us weaving in as we share our lives, we have to share all of our lives,
Yep.
in varying ways, and the fruit always comes. Seeds take root in the mud. It's like, yeah, we have to create that atmosphere uh, where if they don't see us go first, they're going to assume that our lives are perfect
Yes.
and their lives are bad because they're the bad people,
Yes.
or the whatever.
Yep, yep. And
Um,
I can't remember who coined this phrase, but the phrase that more is caught than taught.
yeah.
The and that is so true. I mean, if we are modeling
Yes.
a life of vulnerability where when it's appropriate and and oftentimes it's totally fine just to pepper in a little phrase, a little word, a sentence or two about something, even if that week is not about Romans 1, or First
Yeah.
Corinthians chapter 6, and people pick up on that, like, oh, or even just talking about the challenge of pornography or whatever, sexual sin in general, and as well
Yeah.
as greed and whatever else, envy, right? Lots of different things. But as we talk about that, it normalizes not sin. We don't want to celebrate or normalize
Right.
sin, but it normalizes the conversation that we all struggle. And in doing that, it's such a relief for a senior pastor or people on pastoral teams to be willing to crack that open and share, because it gives everybody else permission to be in a messy place. And the only way we can move forward is to really admit where we're at, right? So that has to come out.
Yes, I think every pastor wants their church to be marked by humility and honesty and I mean, sure, there's pastors out there that don't want that, but I
Yep.
think most of us do. And yet, I find many pastors that I talk to feel like they don't have
Right.
permission to share things that aren't, the parts of their life where there has been struggle or messiness. And it's
Mhm.
like, well, I mean, to your point, it's like, well, you can want a church where other people are honest all day long, but who's going to show them how to do that?
Right.
And if we aren't doing that as leaders, and then it's like, well, my it would change the way my people think about me. It's like, well, great. I mean, if I was worried about the way people thought about me, I would have never left homosexuality.
Right.
It's like we can't buy into that thing of like people need to think of me in a certain light because I'm their pastor. It's like what's that about?
Mhm.
Like how is that any different from how the rest of the world operates?
Yes.
If we want the life of Jesus to be manifest in us, we have to manifest the death of Jesus in us, and the parts of us that had to die so that Jesus could be manifest.
Yeah, it's this weird kind of dichotomy, I think, of pastors that get put on a pedestal by the people in their congregation, and yet there's a way in which that happens and that gets fueled, but then the other side of that is the wheel kind of keeps on turning because we as leaders oftentimes like, for example, I had to recognize a number of years ago that I'm more comfortable being the one that's in control of a
Mhm,
conversation or in control of a
mhm,
relationship. And so I oftentimes, like when I'm not doing well or haven't been doing well, and I feel like, well, gee, nobody's following up with me and no one's really checking in on me, and I'm pouring out, no one's pouring into me. But I've trained people to see me as doing
mm,
well, and like all the
mhm.
time, and I'm always the one that gives, and then I'm mad when I
Yeah.
when people are not really checking in on me, but yet I've kind of shaped that. So it's this dynamic of as leaders, we ones who have gone to Bible college or to seminary, and we've learned to kind of mask it there in a lot of respects. We put a lot of head knowledge in our minds, but we haven't necessarily experienced vulnerable spiritual transformation or
Yeah.
formation. And so we're not used to, we're being told, or again, sometimes the unspoken words are the most powerful. Of nobody can know about your past, nobody can know about your present struggles, nobody can, you can't really open up to others in a way that's vulnerable as a leader, etc. Those messages are sometimes spoken, but then there are often unspoken messages that have deep roots as well. But I just find that dynamic for many pastors in churches, where we've trained people to put us on a pedestal in a sense, and then at the same time that also gets fueled, where people would be shocked if their pastor of 10 years finally opened up and said, I've struggled with pornography, and even on occasion, even as your pastor, but I found the help and
Mhm.
support that I need, or I need to find the help and support, you know what I mean? And I
Mhm.
just think that I love your thoughts about the dynamic of how we can both train people in a sense as pastors to put us on that pedestal, and how it perpetuates. And then we get in this place like, I feel bound. I feel stuck. I don't know how to let anyone into into my interior life as their pastor and shepherd.
Mhm. Yeah, it is hard, and I think there are these realities of like I don't want the people in my church to feel like they are responsible for my
That's
well-being,
right.
or that I'm leaning on them to get my own needs met, because I'm not, no one, in my family, my kids need to see me as human, but I'm not asking them to help me get better. I'm not asking them, in that way. So it is hard, and I do think that people have gotten hurt, and I mean, I know for me, people say weird stuff sometimes in the aftermath of those disclosures. It's like, yeah, there's reality to all that. So I think some things that I'm so thankful, the I'm part of this movement of churches called Antioch, but they're uh, but the culture of our movement of churches, I think, is healthy in many ways, one of which being like we all of us pastors have uh, people overseeing and caring, shepherding for us. Like
Mhm.
we have that structure. And so, I always think like that's part of what can free me to share
Yes.
with my church, because then part of, to your point, like part of what I'm also sharing is like, here's the people that I call when I'm
That's
struggling. Like
right.
I called one of our board members. You guys have met these board members. This is who I call whenever I have sin to confess or I'm weak and I need input. I reach out to these people. Here's the people, our elder team. It's like we're on a weekly accountability call, and here's what that looks like. So I'm able to share struggles, and then also to share here's how I'm entering into the care of God through the avenues that are here. So I'm not just, I think that can be and I'm probably done this before, but we can sometimes just throw our stuff out there like it's spaghetti, and then we are leaving people going to like, is he okay?
No, no,
It's like,
exactly, exactly.
and so then to say like, here's, in different settings are right too. Like if I'm speaking on a Sunday, I probably need to make sure that I'm giving a whole picture, because I'm not going to be having follow up
That's
conversations
right.
with people.
Yeah.
If I'm on a one-on-one setting and it's someone that it just like there's different levels where different venues where I think different ways of sharing is good.
Yes.
But yeah, I do think that like and I have certainly talked with pastors, as I'm sure you have, Gary, where it's like they really don't have anyone pouring into them,
Mhm.
and that is, or they don't have anyone that they could expect to listen or care,
Yes.
and so I think that's the first step is we always we want our leaders to know that they know who they can lean on. And sometimes, it might not be so much in a oversight structure. Sometimes, and I've been in seasons where I've had to kind of like ask for that in different ways.
Mhm.
Um, when it wasn't so much knit in.
Yep. Yeah,
So.
absolutely. Yeah, I think a healthy church is a church that kind of expects and prepares for budgets for their pastors to do some maintenance work around counseling,
Mm.
and honestly, there are times too, I think that, and I think both you and I know what this feels like to be doing pretty well, and feeling like we're growing and we actually are spiritually, but then there'll be something that in some fashion either gets triggered, or God puts his finger on something from part of our history, and it can feel pretty painful and pretty devastating, and maybe a lot of temptation kind of rising up around that. And
Yes.
we need more than just some maintenance in that area. We need to find some real freedom there. So whether that's in a program like Living Waters, or it's some other inner healing program, or maybe a form of spiritual warfare, or licensed counseling, or whatever, that we need to be ready. I mean, I want to be in a church where they recognize that, look, we want to walk with these pastors for the long haul. We want to make sure that they're staying healthy and open and vulnerable, and aren't living double lives. I think that the prospect for a pastor in that particular role, I think the pressure to live a double life, and meaning that I present one way, but inwardly there's all this other stuff going on that I don't want to have happening in my life, but I just don't know where to go with it, and
Yes.
I'm trying to work it out. I think the temptation and the propensity is actually maybe more prevalent in the life of pastors than maybe any other form of career choice or ministry.
Yeah, yeah. There's a spiritual warfare
Yep.
reality. I think like there's, and then there's also especially like like I said, live in Seattle, where there's been so many pastors with thriving churches have these big public failures, whether it was sexual or
Yeah.
whether it was just character issues that took whole huge churches, whole movements of churches down. And so there people come in expecting pastor to lead a double
Yep.
life, and then I know that like part of what the enemy would love is for that to keep perpetuating it more and more. So there is that, and then there's also just a very practical reality. And I'm not like I don't feel like a victim. Being a pastor is a gift. It's such a
Yes.
privilege, and just part of the package is like life doesn't stop. Like to your point, Gary, when the triggering things happen, it's not like my kids disappear and my pastoral responsibilities disappear. Life keeps going at this really fast pace. And so when you hit that spot, it's like, whoa, it's so easy to go like, I don't even know where the space would be to pause and really take inventory. How does that
Yeah.
happen? There's those are just I think some real
Right,
challenges.
right. Well, and let's flip the coin a little bit, and because we are also talking about something, and when you were speaking a little bit ago, I just reminded the fact, certainly we as pastors, I was a pastor for 12 years, on pastoral staff for 12 years, and now leading this ministry. You're a senior pastor. I wasn't even the senior pastor, but have a sense of obviously what that life looks like, and the challenges of it, and the joys of it, as you said. But,
Yeah.
but I also think it's so critical for so much of my life, and you may have experienced this too. I don't know, having grown up in the church like I did, but for so much of my life, and I think some of what I was saying earlier could almost tilt in this direction for those listening or watching our podcast, in that I might be misunderstood as kind of communicating that an individual's spiritual well-being is on the pastor, like it's their responsibility. Now, there is a way biblically in which pastors, I think, will answer for how they
Yeah.
pastored. They're not going to answer for all of the responses, to people getting mad about them speaking truth or
Yeah.
whatever. But
Yeah.
but but the other side of the coin is, I as an individual, I as a son of God, for women, those women, those daughters of God, we are responsible for our own spiritual well-being. So that what that
Yes.
means is, I can't just wait for a pastor to set up every program in the church, to set up every
Right.
possibility of every nuance of something that would be beneficial for me. I need to be actively involved in something I talk a lot about, is pursuing our own bands of brothers, bands of sisters,
Yes.
those two or three or four other men, two or three or four other women, for women, who are going to walk alongside of us. We're walking alongside of them. And everything is on the table, and it doesn't. The other thing I found is, it doesn't take long, even a matter of weeks, for people to put stuff on the table, sharing our stories, and talking about the hard stuff, talking about the abuse, talking about the sin that we were involved in, talking about the things that have been done to whatever. And as we get that on the table, and we start really supporting one another, we wind up
Mhm.
having this incredible group of support and care, where we can live out James 5:16 of confessing our sins to one
Yes.
another. Or, and our wounds. That's not what the Bible say, but our sins done against us, sins we
Yeah.
ourselves have done, so that and praying for each other that we might be healed. There's just so much strength and power in that. And I just want to make sure that those hearing this podcast or watching it are picking up that I always wanted to shift the responsibility of my spiritual well-being for a long time onto my leaders around me, but I really have to
Mm.
take ownership of that and seek out that band of brothers, especially that's going to walk with me and help me excel, and I get to help them excel in their faith and their walk with Christ. What are your thoughts about that, Andrew?
Yeah, I think that's so true. I mean, from day one, the church has never existed. Christians have never existed in perfect
Yeah.
conditions. Like, so whatever our struggles are, there's always going to be reasons that like we don't have the perfect setup. Like, and from day one, like the church is this entity that uniquely Jesus has poured out his Holy Spirit to give supernatural provision where there's not perfect conditions. So whether that's persecution and people making fun of the way you're choosing to live your life or your beliefs or whatever, or whether that's things like, hey, there's not the perfect offering in my church for what I need, or there's not in my area the counselor that really is specialized in this way. It's
Mm,
like, yeah, I mean, these are very real challenges. And if we are people of faith at all, we have to believe that Jesus is going to make a way for each one of us within the conditions that we're in.
yes.
And so I'll take any day someone saying like, "Hey, here's my struggles. I've talked to people in my life group about it. No one responded well, or here's how they respond." Like, I will advocate for that person,
Mhm.
right? But that's different than someone coming going like, "There's no support for me here." And I'm like, "Well, what have you tried?"
Yes.
"Well, I haven't tried anything."
Right.
But I'm not seeing in the announcements that there's the program that's going to meet my need. It's like, well, yeah, we're a church plant.
Right.
It's like, like streamlined programs not our specialty right now. Like, but we believe that the life of God is going to come in the avenues that we do have.
Yeah.
We do have small groups, so
Right.
like let's share there. There's someone here that's willing to get coffee with you. Let's try that.
Mhm.
And because I know, yeah, I mean, I feel so blessed that there was like a ministry specialized in sexual restoration right when I was a new believer. But like pretty quickly, I stepped into a church environment that was just kind of wild and woolly. It was a new church plant, and that's where my wife Jordan really found God and really found healing. But in that church where we were both in, like she didn't have the programs that I'd had in my early days. She just had, a person in the church saying like, I'll try to walk with you, and she was wrapped up in a whole sinful relationship, abusive relationship, couldn't get out. And it was just the very messy, like, hey, why don't you just come and be part of our family? Come share dinner with our family.
Yes.
Come be with our family, and I'll try to walk with you as you fit. Like it wasn't some like streamlined thing. It was just the church being the church, and
Yep.
so we never want to discount. It's not to say that our church is like I right now. My wife and I are really going, okay, how do we get a program going this next year for the specific purpose of people wrestling through their sexual relational stuff. We did one thing like that a few years ago as our church, but again, it's like we really want that, and we also like have to be open to God doing it a different way in some of these conditions where like as a brand new church we didn't have the capacity to put on these programs. We
Sure.
were trying to like you know like
Yep.
make a Sunday morning happen. So yeah, but just that place, like the source isn't in finding the exact right avenue. The source is Jesus, and He will always make a way.
Yep.
I think is just a good place to put our feet and plant them.
Well, and I'm reminded as you say that, Andrew, I'm also reminded of our friend, Rosaria Butterfield, my friend, Rosaria Butterfield.
Yeah.
She was on a podcast a few episodes ago. And one of my favorite books that she's written, I mean, her testimony is so powerful as well. But one of my favorite books is The Gospel Comes to the House Key. And just helping and
Mhm.
equipping the church on what does it look like. And she uses a phrase, radical ordinary hospitality, because
Mhm.
biblical hospitality, ordinary hospitality that's really biblical is radical in our culture. And that's why I found
Yeah.
tons of healing was in families that took me in, that loved Jesus, that allowed me not just to come over for dinner on occasion, which was so sweet and wonderful, or grab coffee with me. And if that's the bandwidth that someone has, then do it, you know? But for
Yep.
those who have an extra room, for those who have the capacity to allow someone to come into their home, there's something so revolutionary about being in an imperfect but a godly environment
Mhm.
that has a kind of healing that 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 really underpins and undergirds the good teaching and the truth that's poured in. That environment alone, or undergirding those things, I think can also add a depth and a richness to all that that person is learning and the relationships of kind of being in someone's home as well. I just think that's a powerful
Yes.
dynamic the church needs to lean into more.
100%.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Andrew, I was gonna ask you something else I'm just drawing a blank on at the moment. So you and I met, as I mentioned in kind of the introduction, through Living Waters, Desert Stream.
Yep.
And what year did you wind up getting involved in that program?
Man, I would have first like gone through a Living Waters program in 2006, I guess.
Okay.
And then I started, I was probably the next year, I was like, a small group assistant.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like, like, so just kind of like started getting involved more and more from there.
Yep.
Uh, yeah.
And you were involved in a ministry prior, and then you also actually wound up on staff for with Desert Stream for a period of time, right?
Yep. Yeah, totally. And we were, there was a season where it was like, um, I knew and was so thankful for the ways that God was meeting me, and never again a place of like, oh, now I'm all my issues are gone, so I'm going to help these other poor people. It's like, no, I still need to
Yeah.
stay in close community, and it's such a joy to just see God meet other people through us. And um so yeah, so and so there was a season of time where it was just kind of this asking God, like, hey, I want to serve, and this is all, I'm like meeting, dating, getting married to my wife, and it's like, where's the right place for us to serve? And I'm so thankful for the ministries that I was able to serve at. And then ultimately we really felt a call uh to bring some of the work of healing, restoration, walking with people for the long haul, and bring that into this church movement of Antioch that God had called us to. That just really, we felt an urgency with that.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, with no knock on what these other ministries were doing. It was just a specific. This is what we
Yeah.
feel
Right.
called to, and we love this church family we're part of, and our church movement is very missional. It's always been very missional, very about the nations. And I think, admittedly, for a time, it's like there wasn't a lot of avenues for people to really increase their own depth, and to really walk in a real ministry of compassion and care in those ways. So it's like, kind of to your point, what you're saying earlier, it's like we kind of had a point. It's like, oh, we could just say that this specific church isn't great at that, so we'll go and do it another way, or we can bring what God has shown us here into the church, and let this church be strengthened in this place where it's weaker. And that's really where the most fruitful years of our walk in ministry has been, just because that's what God called us to,
Yep.
you know.
Yep. Well, there's something I want to also put out there for those who are taking part in this particular podcast episode. And I'm reminded that if there were so many times in my life when I was hopeless, when I just felt like I don't even know, does God even want to touch me with a 10-foot pole? Does he I'm so broken, I'm so gross, I'm so sexually and emotionally leprous, in a sense, and just so unclean. And felt like, is there anyone? I didn't have any personal testimonies growing up in church of anybody else who'd even done, even brushed up against sexual sin, let alone dove in and was so broken. And of course, they were all around me, but no one was talking about it actually. But to my point earlier, but what are your thoughts about how the church can help, how we as individuals can, and this just kind of builds on what we're talking about earlier, but how can we if God could come into my life and your life and the hundreds and hundreds of others that Melissa and I and you and Jordan know by name, and people that have come out of both the LGBT world as well as heterosexual whatever fetishes or just brokenness, um, we need to get that message out more and more so that people know, look, you're not too far gone. You are not beyond God's help. You're not. I often say the power of God does not stop at the threshold of the LGBT community. It also doesn't stop at the threshold of sexual sin. We see that obviously in what you brought up earlier of Jesus dealing with the woman who had been married 5 times and the woman at the well. So and was now living with another man. But how can we become uh, that hopeful message to others who are wrestling and struggling? I mean, we talked about this earlier, but I just want to kind of cap this a little bit with your thoughts on that, and then I want to shift a little bit more to your marriage and what led to the opportunity to be married as a guy coming out of that space and all that.
Yeah. Yeah, first story in the Bible after creation is sin entering the world and then shame, you
Yes.
know, and shame's like such a primal thing, right? And I think it looks different for everyone, and some people, their response to shame is that religious mask where I'm just not going to talk about my problems and my life's going to look put together. Some people, shame's going to look like what it was for me is like, I don't fit in with the church that I see, so I'm just going to rebel and I'm going to just do my own thing with my shame because I don't see a way to resolve it here. We're all just going to have our own responses to shame. So I think like all like I guess what I'm saying is like what it shows me that this the first story in the Bible is just how much shame is a core thing for every single human person, and for anyone who has had Jesus meet us in our shame and remove our shame and welcome us into community, into family
Mm,
with him, and then in the church and in real relationship. And anyone who's experienced it knows how messy that is, but how profound and powerful that is. And anyone sharing the specifics of what that has been for them is going to translate to people with any number of other struggles. And uh and so I just think like, I think in the church, whether it's on a Sunday morning or just in a small group or whatever, the more that we can highlight the ways that Jesus meets us in our shame and walks us out of shame, I just think that has such a ripple effect.
yes.
And then you know and and then it's the place of like we even regularly do, when we have on Sunday mornings just a ministry time, there's just these reminders with the people who are praying is like, hey, whatever someone brings, like, this isn't the moment to like give them your advice. This is just like I'm so honored, this is so good that you brought this into the family of God, let's take this to Jesus.
Yes.
So it's just the keeping things simple, as in like, Jesus meets us in our shame and our pain have this place to go. This is normal in family God. I did this on Sunday. We did like it just forget what the ministry time was. It was like, people who need God's comfort. But I just said, I was like, hey, if there's not a place where you specifically need supernatural comfort today, you probably will next week. So in
Yes.
in the family of God, we don't do the like, what are people going to think if I raise my hand today or if I go forward? It's like, we don't do that. We do like in the family of God, everyone's going to have needs and then when we're in a place where we feel strong, then we have the strength to give away to the people who are weak. That's what we do.
Yep.
That's what the family is. So we just have to like live out and express that like family of God isn't performancy where we're all just showing what a good job we're doing. Family of God's where the strong people help the people who are weak, and next week it might be that person that was weak last week strong and able to help the other
Yes.
person. That's
Yes.
just the rhythm that we're in.
Yep.
It's normalizing being in need of a savior and having a savior that's going to meet our needs.
Yeah, and it's calling everyone to participate as opposed to be a spectator, which is so often,
Yes.
the kind of the model of a Sunday morning, and if we can change our perspective. We often talk about wanting to help churches become teaching hospitals, to have that mentality of maybe you
Yeah.
came in addicted, broken, in need of the ER, not even just some time in the hospital for some reason, but you came into the ER, and we want to be able to train and equip you to be the next round of emotional, spiritual ER doctors and nurses that are helping others, and that we come to church with eyes for others, not just
Yes.
to evaluate whether it's my favorite song, whether the worship was too loud, whether it was this or that, or it really is more about, hey, God, give me, yes, fill me up where I need to be filled up, but also help me to be an avenue through which, really an avenue of living water, where water is being poured in, living water is coming in from you, but it's also going out to those who have needs.
Yep. Yeah, we tell our church members from time to time, like, when you come in on Sunday, will you just give your first fruits to God? Will you just, before you talk to your friends, will you just look for someone who you haven't seen before,
Mm,
who looks uncomfortable, and just go find out their name.
so
Ask
good.
them if they've gotten coffee. It's like, just have that first thrust be like, how can I have someone experience home before I just enjoy all the benefits of being home myself?
Yes. Yeah, that's great. I love that. And so Andrew, I also wanted to chat with you, as I said a moment ago. So you and I are both married, and you and I
Yeah.
know other men and women who have come out of the LGBT world to follow Christ. We know plenty that are single and walking with Jesus and serving him in meaningful ministry, but we know a number that have gone on to do what at one time we all thought was probably an impossibility, which
Yes.
is even to be open to the possibility of marriage to the opposite sex and to
Um,
family and life and those kind of things. Talk a little bit about how what was that like for you, seeing Jordan, kind of getting to know her, and for many of us as formerly gay self-identified men, many of us had really easy relationships with women and as friendship, but had no interest sexually, romantically, or whatever. Talk a little bit about that for you and your process.
yeah, totally. You know, lust always, it looks so different than love, right? Because lust is so like, I need this now and I need this in order to be okay. And when, for me at least, like, the first thing was that I had to let go of that kind of graspy, like, that's what romantic relationship was supposed to be,
Mm,
was this kind of amped up, I need this person, I won't be okay without him. Like, that's what I think I expect. And I talk to guys all the time who don't come out of homosexuality, and that's what they think relationship is. Like,
yes.
this girl needs to look like the porn star of my dreams, or whatever. It's
Yep.
like, what are you talking about? Like, so I think first I had to let go of what I thought like love was, which was all about me feeling thrilled all the time.
Yep.
And then uh, and then and then to me it became like learning to see women as other. Like, I'm here and I want women to feel honored through me. They're not my buddies in the way that guys are my buddies. Like, I just had to really establish that kind of difference. I remember when I was single having some times where I would, like, get coffee with a woman, and I think it was kind of awkward. I mean, I was awkward. We're all awkward, but I
That's
was just
right.
saying, like, hey, I'm not asking you on a date. I just want to say, like, I just see you as a friend. We're just getting coffee, but I know, like, I'm a man. You're a woman. I don't want there to be confusion here. And these women are like, I never thought we were dating. Something weird. But it was just important for me as much as anything to, like, kind of establish that.
Yep.
And then and with Jordan, when I first was in a small group at church and she was there, I didn't think much more of her other than, like, here's just another cool woman. And she has told me many times since that meeting that she was not attracted at all to me too. So it's like, thanks, honey. But it was like it started with us truly as just being friends. But what I started to see was, like, I love seeing who Jesus is in this person. And again, I was in community, so I'd kind of be processing with guys that I'm in community with. And I remember a guy that was discipling me at the time just saying, like, hey, really, see, like, you guys seem to really hit it off, like, what's going on there? And I said, yeah, I really like her. I don't really want to date her because I really like her, and I feel like if I date her, it's all going to end badly. She's going to get hurt, and I don't want that. And so, and I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna be attracted to her. I don't know if we're gonna be marriage material together. So it's like better to not try than to try and it all and be some, like, thing. And this guy was just like, "Hey, don't live in fear. You're not asking her to marry you.
Mhm.
Like, but why don't you just ask her to get coffee? Like, you like being with her. And so why don't you just, so she kind of, we chuckled even today. Like when I asked her out, I said, I don't know if we're more than friends, but would you want to go on some dates? So she's always like, she'll say, "Honey, remember when you asked me to go on some dates?" So I just said, let's go on a few dates and just see if there's more to this than friendship.
Yep.
And it took a little time. It took time for her too. We were friends, but what we both learned was like that the foundation of our relationship wasn't going to be on like I need to touch this body part of yours immediately. It was just like I love seeing who God is in you, and I want to, and if nothing else, I want to just be an advocate for you to be walking in all that God has for you. But as we did that, I started to see the more I got close to her, the more I wanted to be closer to her,
Yep. Yep.
and over time that became a desire for physical nearness, and it just developed.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad that I didn't buy into like because out the gate I didn't have some like sex drive towards her. That I'm glad that I was challenged to not disqualify that because again we're all just so steeped in a lustful culture, right? So we're just so used to that. But in God's design, right, it just makes sense. Like He plants seeds, and over time they grow, right? So like having this thought of like I really enjoy who God's made you to be, allowing that to grow over time, put me in the league with every other guy who is actually trying to have healthy relationship, right? Is that this has to develop over time, and I have to continue rejecting the false counterfeit ways of relating.
Yes.
So I think that was like a thing for me that I've seen is like, yeah, there was some unique stuff because my unique stuff with women was like women are too much for me, and so I wanted I wanted to not come under that.
Mhm.
So I had to learn to step out in ways that were more uncomfortable for me, and some of my friends were having to rein in what was lust filled in them to learn the way of love. But either way, it's like the way of love is this one step at a time. It's seeing the other person through God's eyes. It's honoring, respecting them, and it's seeing God ultimately put His love for her into me,
Yep.
which is so different than me deciding what I like, don't like about this person.
Yes, yes. Yeah, and so like you're saying, whether you're coming at it from a position similar where we're at in terms of needing to learn to where we would ordinarily kind of be put off at the idea coming from our
Hmm.
background is in the LGBT world, or if
Hmm.
you're coming at it from a perspective of always being heterosexually wired and whether it's infatuation or whatever the case is, so often in that space people will mistake infatuation for love, or they'll mistake
Right.
lust for love, and oftentimes men will not honor the women in their lives by caring enough about them that they will not pressure them for sex, or
Right.
will protect them both from his desire as well as potentially her desire.
Hmm.
Genuine love actually will do that, and
Hmm.
genuine love will actually say, no, I'm yes, this is difficult, and yes, I maybe we're engaged and I can't wait till we're married until we can really enter fully into this union that God designed for us. But love is not going to push that boundary and take something from you that is not yet mine as your husband, or as a woman
Yeah.
toward her future husband. So
Yeah.
the other thing, in that same kind of vein of thought is, well, in a sense, I want to shift a little bit to fathering. Like for me, it's one of the greatest joys of my life to be able to be a
Yeah.
father to my two sons. And something
Yeah.
at one point in my life, I didn't think that I thought I'd be a horrible father and didn't have any interest in that,
100%.
and really just kind of put that to the side entirely. And what are your thoughts about fatherhood and just how God has kind of grown you up and matured you as a father?
Yeah. It's so wild. Yeah, I agree. I never thought I would be a dad. I never wanted to be a dad. And maybe I said this earlier, but we have four kids now. Oldest is 10 and youngest is 4. Two boys and two
Mm,
girls. And uh it's so it's so joyous, and it's so hard, and it's so refining, and it's such a place of like I think parenting more than any other part of my life is just it requires me to stay free and to get set free from performance, because in these kind of close everyday relationships I'm going to fail every
Yep.
day, and my kid's going to fail every day, and if I can't accept my failure, I'm not going to be able to accept their failure, and I'm going to put all that stuff on them, right? So it's like it's such a crucible. And every time I, am walking with new parents, there's always this thing of like, oh, this life that we used to be able to kind of tightly control, like there's so much out of our control now. It's like, yeah, this is all
Everything's
the
out of our
thing.
control.
This is us learning that the world's bigger than
Yeah.
us, right? And so it's been such a joy. It's so funny. Like I have two sons, and they're both like sports fanatics. And I talk to other boy dads, and they're all like running drills with their kids. I'm like, oh, maybe I should. Like I don't know. Like never occurred to me. Like they share their sports stuff with me. I'm like, thanks for sharing, son.
Right.
But it's so healing too. When I do play sports with them, they love it because they can beat me.
That's
And so we
awesome.
have fun. It's like it has been such a place of God redeeming things and challenging me to grow and to become a more Christ-like man.
Yeah.
For them.
Yep.
Uh, so
And I also just want to, as we kind of come to a place of wrapping up here, I would love your thoughts on this particular topic. The idea of coming out of a lot of sexual sin maybe in the heterosexual world and just being
yeah,
saturated with addiction in that area, or coming out of LGBTQ, what have you. The idea of just sort of jumping from that space into marriage, or yeah, let's just say that, into marriage, or to parenting, and that somehow is going to be healthy, or that's going to be like it's going to fix me in some fashion. We've seen
yeah,
enough disaster where people have tried to use marriage as to the opposite sex as some
yeah,
kind of fix me thing, whether that is, again, somebody who's opposite sex attracted but has really gotten saturated in sexual
yeah,
addiction of one kind or another, or if it's somebody in the LGBT world, mostly same sex attracted, but then trying to use marriage as a way of quote unquote fixing themselves.
yeah,
All I can say is I've seen the disaster of that. But I
yeah.
think what has, I've been Melissa and I've been married almost 18 years. You and Jordan, it's been how many years?
10.
10,
Or
yeah.
no, sorry, 12.
12, yes. That's right. And, but so the idea of the longevity of marriage for us has been, and also finding joy, even if, of course, it's hard, of course, it's refining, but finding joy in it as well is because we understood, and for me, so much of it flows out of Andrew Comiskey and Desert Stream and Living Waters,
Yes.
the need for the more, the need for healing, the need for
Yeah,
restoration before jumping into, or not even jumping into, but before
yeah,
being ready to take
yeah,
on that role of being a husband, taking on that role of being a father. And of course, there's always ongoing refinement. There's a lot
yep,
more ahead for me, I know. But what are your thoughts about that? As opposed, I think we get
yeah,
the cart before the horse sometimes in an
yes,
attempt to sort of fix ourselves or whatever. So what are your thoughts,
yes.
Andrew?
Yes, I all the time. Just a few weeks ago, sat down with a guy who was, for the first time, really working out his same sex stuff, but then he was kind of dating a girl. His parents were pressuring him to date this
Ah,
girl. It's like, and I'm like, hey, take a season. Just focus on you
that's right.
figuring out who you are, who God is, and getting that foundation, because marriage is such a beautiful gift, and it's such a crucible, right? What's in you is going to come out,
Yes,
and we're not ever going to go into it perfect, but you want to go into it knowing that you've done the work to establish who God's made you to be secure in that. Then you want to do the work of developing and standing in good friendships with other guys, or for women, a good friend. Like, you'll need that community when marriage is hard, when dating's hard. You need people who are truth tellers, that know you, that you can confide in, that'll sharpen you and call you to continue
that's right.
loving like Jesus. So start with this place of grounding yourself in who you are, who God says you are, and who God is, how you connect with Him. Then let it be a focus. And these happen at the same time, right? We were, and then we learn healthy friendships and how to do that, and then give your dating relationship enough time to develop, to where you can really see God grow love for this person, and then you'll have the rest of your life to, right, to let that crucible squeeze out what's in you, but you have that ground where you're not coming in it already not knowing how to stand yourself. It's
Yeah.
so important.
Yeah, it is.
um,
It's
um,
absolutely critical. So 2 more things. One is, I wanna talk a little bit about the book that you've written about your story, which is so
oh, sure.
critical, important, and also how, people, if they have a desire, can connect with you and whether that's through email or what have you. But before we do that, I always like to double check with, our guests and just see if there's something that has kind of been on your mind or heart that came up through our podcast or maybe before even,
Hmm,
uh, and it feels like something you kind of just like to leave with our audience,
hmm.
that you've not been able to fully share. Anything on your mind at all is kind of a last, amount of sharing with our audience that is in your heart.
Maybe just that. I mean, this is kind of a small thing, but just I was in worship in church on last Sunday night, and it really struck me for, um, and it's just been kind of sitting in me since then. It's just how much like there's not a right skill set uh, that makes a good Christian, right? It's like, being a person who naturally is like, has a high degree of self will or has a high degree of self control, or a person who, is naturally like well spoken or whatever. It's like these aren't qualifiers to being a good Christian. I just has been
Mm,
tender in my heart how much like every single one of us who Jesus calls, were dead in our trespasses and sins and have been made alive with him. So it's like any place, we all have different places where we get insecure about whatever our strengths weaknesses are. We either get proud in our
mm,
strengths or like bugged about our weaknesses, and like Jesus isn't looking at any of that, right? He's wanting to put something in us that hasn't just come from our natural skill set and wiring. And so that encourages me, and the parts of my calling today that I feel not great at, that I know that was so important for me to grasp early on, that like I wasn't disqualified because of my mistakes and my propensities. God can do anything through anyone. All he asks is the humble person who's
yep.
leaning on his power and not
Yep.
on their own strength.
Well, and what that reminds me of, Andrew, actually, this occurred to me earlier and I forgot to mention it, but I think this is the perfect time to say it. I was many years ago, uh, I was with you. I think so. You've been married 12 years, probably was 11 years ago or so, is before you guys had kids. I think I was at a conference in Oklahoma, and I was staying with you in Jordan. And
Okay.
I remember coming downstairs early in the morning to get coffee or something, and I came down the stairs and it was dark and there was a little light on in the living room, and you were on the couch, sitting on the couch, and you were just in this, and I think of this often. I know this sounds maybe silly and you have no
I
idea
have
until
no
I'm saying
memory
this.
of
I
this.
know, right? So I come down the stairs and you're sitting on the couch and you're just having a time with the Lord. Your hands are, your palms are face up, on your knees as you're just sitting. And what I love about that, and that memory comes back often actually, and what I loved about that was, and it was very, I just remember feeling so comforted in my heart when I saw you, because we're getting ready to leave to go to this conference and you were taking time to be with the Lord. But it wasn't just, and certainly there's a space for digging into the word and learning and growing in that, but there was this posture of openness before the Lord as you were just receiving. And so what you were just describing, like, I think that posture that I came down and saw you in as I went around the corner
Mm,
into the kitchen, was that openness and that receptivity is what you're describing right now. Like,
mm,
even with all of our failures, all those places where we maybe not have certain gifts in one place or another, and of course we do have spiritual gifts in other places, but that posture of openness and vulnerability, and Lord, use me in any way that you want to.
amen.
I just think that really is what, he calls us into, certainly.
Yes.
And again, that memory comes up, quite often as a point of comfort and as a reminder, Gary, don't strive, for this, but
Mm,
really rest and open yourself, up to the Lord. So I thank you for that. And again, you have
amen.
no recollection of that, but that's all right. So, because that was just your normal, your normal life and normal posture. So, Andrew, before we wrap up the podcast,
Sure.
what is the name of your book? And it's
Yeah,
based
yeah.
on your story.
Yeah. So first off, if anyone wants to chat or needs some help support, my email address through our church is andrew.franklin@mosaic.family. So that's andrew.franklin@mosaic.family. My book is called Created for Love, and I think it's on Amazon. And if it's not, I know I have some copies at our church, so you can just email me and I'll send you one. Like I told Gary earlier, I'm very bad about like keeping up with how. Anyway, but yeah, Created for Love. Subtitle is Reclaiming Jesus's Vision for Gender, Sexuality, and Relationship. And yeah,
Yeah, I know I bought it on Amazon, so as far as I know, it's still out there and available. So,
that's all.
so there's an update. All right.
Yeah.
Well, Andrew, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. And everybody, thank you for tuning in for another episode of the Love and Truth Network podcast. We appreciate you. We hope that this episode is both an encouragement and an exhortation if needed. But we just pray that the Lord would use these words and what Andrew and I were just sharing and openness and vulnerability to be something that bolsters your heart and your walk with Jesus and also with the body of Christ. Bless you. We'll see you in a future episode. Thank you so much for joining us for this Love and Truth Network podcast. To listen to or view future episodes, please check us out at loveandtruthnetwork.com/podcast. You may also subscribe to Apple Podcast, Spotify, or Google Music. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in a future episode.